Hi, and welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of Kevin MD. Today on the show, we have Kristen Yates. She's an obstetrics gynecology physician, and she practices in New Hampshire, just like I do. And she wrote the Kevin MD article, Coping with Fear as a Physician During a Pandemic. And we'll talk about that. But first, Kristen, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
All right, so tell me your story and your journey to where you are today.
Yeah, I followed the well laid out path from medical school to residency, starting right at college, like many people. Knew I would always kind of end up in the women's health field, and OBGYN just really stuck out to me. So I did my residency in Pittsburgh, but I'm from New Hampshire, so I knew I would end up here eventually. And once we had kids, we just wanted the support from my family, so I ended up back in New Hampshire. And how I got into the writing and blogging atmosphere was really through my own journey as a new attending with my struggle with imposter syndrome and burnout. And that was a way for me to kind of try to relate to other physicians and get the word out that maybe I'm not the only one feeling like that.
Wonderful. And you wrote this Kevin MD article, which I thought was very poignant, coping with fear as a physician during a pandemic. And I think a lot of doctors were scared, especially during the first few weeks of the pandemic, just because it's something that's new, novel, and
Hmm.
and we didn't know how it was going to affect our health, our families, and our profession. So I was
Hmm.
wondering if you could tell me the story behind that article and why you decided to write it.
Yeah, for me, it was at the beginning of the pandemic, like you mentioned, and it was this really interesting like juxtaposition of my life as a physician and my my role as a mother, and especially as an expecting mother. Usually I try to separate somewhat those two roles that I have as a physician and a mom, and of course they intersect here and there, but with the pandemic I found that this kind of lingering fear was not, it was just there with me all the time, and it was affecting, not only fear for my patients that I've always had in different circumstances, certainly in obstetrics and both gynecology, but then also a fear of, how my interactions with my patients was I bringing that home, and was it affecting my family, my husband and my kids, and my pregnancy as well. And it was this really interesting intersection that I was just reflecting on. And for me, vulnerability and kind of really getting to the core and like the human part of me as a physician was really important, which is what made me want to write the article.
So you talked about some of the things that you were fearful of during those first few weeks of the pandemic. What were some of the
Mhm.
things that you did to overcome those fears?
I think just recognizing that I had them and it was okay, which sounds really simple, but I think for a long time I tried to not face those feelings that I was having, and try to like quash them. And when I realized that it's normal and healthy for me to be fearful and that I should be fearful, it really made some more room for me to acknowledge the fear and really kind of get to the root of what I was most worried about. And the only thing that you really can control are the thoughts that you have about things going on in your life. And it was grounding for me to recognize that, and then kind of think on purpose thoughts that were more useful than just focusing on the fear all the time.
So you wrote this article back in April, and
Hmm.
we're filming this the first week of June. So as the pandemic has evolved, what are some of the new issues that's come up over the past week or so, and some of the issues that you see going forward in the foreseeable future?
Yeah, right now I think it's the biggest thing is how to navigate the opening up of the world, and especially, what do I tell my patients who are just delivering or and want to have their families there and meet their new baby, and kind of trying to navigate that in a system where it's pretty unclear how to do that safely. And in New Hampshire, where I think I feel lucky that I'm here in a pandemic if I could be
Mhm.
anywhere, but there's still some confusion about how do I tell my patients, like, are you safe? How safe are you? Do you still, what precautions should you be taking? And that's been a challenge right now.
And I think a lot of clinicians, not just physicians, but nurses and advanced practice practitioners as well, they are feeling fearful, just similarly
Hmm.
to how you described. What are some tips that you could offer them going forward as the pandemic evolves?
Yeah, I think that the number one tip that worked for me is to really just don't indulge too much in social media or the news, and not to be naive and not to ignore what's going on, but we're wired to, our brain wants us to be fearful and have this, kind of, oh my gosh, we could die at any moment type of mentality. And if you're constantly feeding your brain that information with numbers and statistics and news and social media, then it can really spiral out of control. And that's exactly what it did for me. So I really had to limit that, and it's been useful. Like, get the information that I need and then turn it off.
So let's take a step back. And you're an obstetrics gynecology physician,
Hmm.
and those things can never be put off, even during a pandemic. So I
Right.
was wondering if you could describe for my audience, how has the pandemic affected your practice?
Yeah. I'm a private practice. I'm one of the four owners of our private practice. So from a business perspective, it's been stressful, and trying to support my staff, but also keep the business floating and making it through this pandemic. So that's been an interesting and stressful situation. But also for my patients, and especially when it first started, and all the things that were going to be changing on labor and delivery, and only one partner allowed, kind of have to stay in your room, and navigating those waters, and not making my patients feel anxious about it, but seeing them less in the office, doing more telemedicine visit. And it was all happening so fast. Every single day there were things that were new and changing, and trying to navigate that, but stay calm and be able to be a calm source of reason for my patients as well.
Is there anything that you wish you known back then that you know now?
I think that it's a challenge to juggle all the different roles that I have as a physician and a business owner and a mom and a wife. And I think that if I had just been able to better embrace each one of those roles independently and with grace for myself, then I would have maybe handled it a little bit more smoothly than I did.
And what's one thing that you've been passionate about recently, or something that you've been curious about recently?
Yeah, I think that this pandemic has really kind of made me realize how passionate I am about helping young physicians and early career physicians find satisfaction in their career. And this is something for the 18 months that I've kind of been dabbling in. But this made me realize that that core foundation of knowing how to manage your mind and how powerful our thoughts are, this pandemic made it even more clear that that's so needed in medicine, because we just don't learn it. So that's kind of made me even more passionate to focus on those projects in order to help physicians out there who are feeling like they're struggling or like an imposter and that kind of thing.
And I think that's so true, because the pandemic has really thrown our profession for a loop. It's no
Hmm.
longer a safe job anymore. We have a lot of physicians who are either furloughed or laid off or simply put out
Yeah,
of business. And having interests and passions outside of medicine is so much more important during the pandemic than we ever
hmm,
realized before. And my final
absolutely.
question to you: what's your take-home message for the Kevin MD audience?
I think it's just along the lines exactly like you said, is a physician and anyone really in medicine, you're more than just your job. You have so many different sides to you, and let yourself explore those sides, because when you are able to cultivate every aspect of your personality, you'll be better at your career. You'll be a better physician, you'll be more present with your patients. So don't try to quash those interests. Really elevate them and focus on them outside of medicine, because it really makes you more fulfilled overall.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story and your insight. On the show, we have Kristen Yates. She's an obstetrics gynecology physician and wrote the Kevin MD article, Coping with Fear as a Physician During a Pandemic. Kristen, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you very much.